And the jurisprudence of relativism is legal positivism, where there's no higher standard than the law, where all that it takes for a law to be valid is that it be enacted by the prescribed procedure and be effective. Hans Kelsen, the leading legal positivist of the 20th century, was an honest guy. After the Second World War, he said Auschwitz and the Soviet Gulag were valid law. He could not criticize them as being unjust because he said, and I quote, "Justice is an irrational ideal." He thought justice was the basis for democracy. John Paul set him straight. He said, no, if there's no acknowledged transcendent morality, then it all becomes a question of power, and relativism leads to totalitarianism. And that's true. And you're going to be under pressure to be a relativist, to lie, to cheat, to steal. You know from Veritatis Splendor and from common sense that the negative prohibitions of the commandments, which are specifications of the natural law, allow no exceptions. But you're going to pay a price for your fidelity. Let me tell you a story. Captain James Mulligan from Virginia was shot down in Vietnam in 1966. He spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, half of them in solitary confinement. For a time, he was the cellmate of future Senator Jeremiah Denton. And he and his fellow prisoners were severely and often tortured to make him betray his fellow prisoners or his country. And under torture, he composed a prayer. He kept himself going throughout the whole ordeal by prayer, especially the rosary. And under torture, he breathed this prayer, which we ought to make our own. He said, Lord, give me the strength and the guts to see this thing through to the end, one way or the other. No one else knows, Lord, but you and I know, and that's all that's necessary. You suffered for your beliefs. I must suffer for mine. Right is right if no one's right. Wrong is wrong if everyone's wrong. And that's the answer to relativism. The third lie is individualism. The social contract theorists deny the social nature of man. They tell us that there was this mythical state of nature in which the person was an isolated individual, just milling around with no relation to others unless he consents. That's the origin of pro-choice. Planned Parenthood didn't think it up. The mother has no relation to the child in her womb unless she consents. The husband and wife have no continuing relation unless they continue to consent. And the individual is God. Conscience is no longer an act of judgment as to the rightness or wrongness of an act. It's an exercise of the unfettered will, and whatever the individual chooses is right for him. And they say that you're going to be told that that's freedom. But freedom cannot be separated from the truth. Look, you're free to choose to put sand in the gas tank of your car. But you will no longer be free to drive your car because you have violated the truth of the nature of your car. You're free to lie, to fornicate, to steal, but you will be diminished because you have violated the truth of your nature. And that is very important. The one thing that the autonomous individual can never do. Think about this. They say, I'm in charge. He can never put himself out of existence. Whether he likes it or not, he's going to live forever. Where he spends that eternity is up to him. See, we Catholics have an inferiority complex. We think the smart guys are the academics who think that something can come from nothing, who are absolutely sure that they can't be sure of anything, and who think that freedom means their ability, their right to do whatever they want without restriction. And we need to recognize that this generation, this culture has lost not only its faith but also its mind, and what they need is the truth. And they need that truth especially with respect to the right to life. But there, we have a problem. Our pro-life efforts are compromised by our timidity on contraception, the unspoken issue. The Anglican Lambeth Conference was the first time any Christian denomination had ever said that contraception could ever be objectively right. The Catholic Church continues to teach the truth. Contraception is wrong. First, it deliberately separates the unitive and procreative aspects of sex. Secondly, by so changing the conjugal act, the man and the woman make themselves, rather than God, the arbiter of when life begins. And third, it frustrates the total mutual self-donation that ought to characterize the conjugal act. If you make yourself the arbiter of when life begins, you're going to make yourself the arbiter of when it ends, as in abortion and euthanasia. John Paul said abortion and contraception are fruits of the same tree. And if it's entirely up to man as to whether sex will have any relation to procreation, you tell me why Freddie and Harry can't get a marriage license. Pastor Donald Sensing of Trinity United Methodist Church in Franklin, Tennessee, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal back in March 2004, and he said, the people who are opposing same-sex marriage are a little late. So that issue was settled 40 years ago, when the walls of marriage were breached by the acceptance of the contraceptive pill. And so when we look at this, we say, well, what does it really mean? God, in his wisdom, has chosen to depend on human cooperation for the creation of new citizens for heaven. And the contracepting couple, by altering the nature of the act, deliberately prevent that creation. What they say to God is something like this, and really think about this. They say, look, God, for all we know, it may be your will that from this act of ours, a new person will come into existence who will live forever. For all we know, that may be your will, and we won't let you do it. That's awesome. That's why John Paul said contraception is so profoundly wrong as never to be justified. He said to think or say the contrary is equivalent to maintaining that in some situations it is lawful to deny that God is God.